as you are aware, we're hiring more pilots this year than any airline has in the history of aviation. So we'll roll out the year around 2,300 new hire pilots on property since January. We today started another class, usually on Wednesdays, so we're at 1,200 pilots on property in American today that have been hired since January 1. We turned the hiring machine back on back in September, and we hired almost 600, so 580 pilots between September and December. So rough math, obviously we hired almost 1,800 pilots, and we still not even at the year point yet. So well on track to meet that goal. It is not an easy task by any means, and we're also at a time that's a little bit different where historically American has been a great place that folks want to go. That's still the case, but in the past you had 20,000 highly qualified applicants to fill anywhere between 500 and 1,000 jobs a year. As an industry right now, we're hiring over 1,000 pilots a month, 1,200 pilots a month. If you take in the low-cost carriers like Spirit and Frontier, add in the majors and the legacy airlines like ourselves, it's 1,100 pilots a month. So we're hiring more in a month than have been in years past. And we also did not produce nearly the amount of pilots in the last 15 years that have been produced over that same amount of time in years past. So we've kind of put ourselves in a weird corner there, but at the same time we've advanced technology, we've simplified our fleets, we've simplified the process to get there. We've come up with some great programs to help be a catalyst to increase our pilot, but obviously it still takes, it's not a 6-month course, it takes years to get the experience and the qualifications to be an airline pilot, and we still pick the best pilots that are out there. So I'll reassert today that we are not changing or lowering our standards in the pilots that we're hiring. Well aware of what their career is going to bring, well aware of the amount of retirements that we have, new aircraft coming on board. We're doing everything we can to make sure that the pilots we hire both set up our current captains and future captains to have the best first officers to support them, but also to be the best captains for us, because their time to move to that left seat is faster than ever before. That career path, Russ kind of touched on it a little bit, but just 7 years, 50% of our seniority list, which is the largest seniority list in the world, meets the mandatory retirement age. As history has shown us, about an additional 5% will probably retire on top of that, so we factor that in. We've got some wide-body aircraft that are coming on order a little bit late. That might be a slight blessing on my side of the house, but certainly a constraint. But we've got some planned growth in there. That means that the pilots that we're hiring today in 7 years will be in the top 50% of our seniority list. So really fast movement in that regard. The average age of our wide-body captains, incidentally, is 62. That means more than 50% of our wide-body captains mandatory retire in the next 3 years. And we all know that that wide-body captain seat is the one that triggers the most amount of movement. So not only does it strain us on the hiring side, it also puts some strains in the schoolhouse, and that's not an overnight fix either. You can't just put Legos together and have 20 new sets. So I'll tell you that Lori Klein and her team are doing everything they can to help grow that, increase capacity, and doing a great job of managing what they're dealing with now and allowing us to kind of keep up. We've created a little bit of a bubble, and Russ kind of alluded to that as well, that they end up with some time between going through orientation. Right now, at times about 8 weeks, that they get paid to go do distance learning. That takes about a week to do. But at the same time, it's not a bad place to be, because our competitors, our peers out there, they do low-cost training pay for that period. So what we're finding is that our pilots that we hire are sticking around a lot better than our peers. To put that in numbers, if we look back when we started in September till now, it's less than 4% of the pilots that we hire that subsequently leave to go somewhere else. And most of the time when we're able to get the complete data of where they're going or why they left, the concern has nothing to do with how they've been treated or the backlog of training or anything like that. It really is just, hey, I live in Atlanta, and Atlanta makes sense to me. That's really the biggest driving factor, is not commuting to work. The other things that we're seeing out there that's a little bit different is, gone are the days that those with damaged records go to flight cargo. FedEx weathered COVID a lot better than the passenger airlines did because they're the diversification of what they do. And so there are some folks that got a little bit nervous and went to FedEx. On the other side of that, we also had 3 pilots now that left this time last year to go to FedEx that have called back begging for an opportunity to re-interview and come back to American. So not always, the grass is not always greener. Sometimes you have to experience it yourself to learn that lesson. But that being said, we're doing really well. We've had only 3 pilots that didn't show up to class since September. So really good success rate of getting people to come to class. And our success rate on the interviews as well is that the final stage, our interviewers get to make the biggest decision of who we hire and who we don't hire. And then we still have the pilot selection board that convenes with those that aren't successful in the interview or have some other things to have broader eyes on what's going on with those individuals. But our success rate is almost 90% of the pilots that we invite in to interview are successful in getting a job offer from American. And so those numbers are the best in the industry, really. So my team has been doing a fantastic job, and I'll kind of go back to that March of 2020 as almost a pivotal moment that helped us set up for this, because there are some things that happened during COVID that would have been seen as almost detrimental to our efforts to hire this year, but some of the things that changed during that time really set the stage for us to come back strong. And the biggest one that I'm really proud of our flight leadership team, Russ and Chip Kimball at the time. We came back from an even more packed space. Kathy was there, Deborah was there, and Women in Aviation the first weekend of March 2020. And at that point, Delta and United had stopped hiring. In fact, United had just stopped hiring the Friday before, and they were supposed to have a class on that following Monday, and they canceled class and told everyone not to show up. We were still hadn't come to that conclusion yet, but the week after that is when we decided we need to stop classes, stop putting new hires through training, and so your American Airlines flight leadership team convened to discuss how we were going to shut things down, and this was around March 9th or 10th. There was a class set to start on March 17th, and unanimously decided, hey, we aren't going to do what United just did. We got 68 folks that are supposed to show up at class, and did a very classy thing. And instead of, even though we didn't need them to be in training, a unanimous decision at that senior leadership level to decide, let's bring them on payroll anyway, let's give them a seniority number, let's figure out a way to use the things that are now household names like Teams and Zoom. Back then, none of us knew what that meant. You know, to me, as a child of the 70s and 80s, Zoom was a TV show I watched when I was a kid. So, you know, it was a way that we figured out to take care of those individuals, and they were amongst the first that came back and got actually on property and trained in July of 2021. But in that entire time frame, there was only 1 month they didn't get paid, even though they were amongst a group of furlough. The efforts that the APA and our senior leadership team at American did on the Hill to get the CARES 2 and 3 pass ensured all of those pilots were paid for almost that entire time. So that sent a huge signal to the industry. And when we turned on the switch to start bringing in new hires in there, people are still beating down the door wanting to come here, come to America. So that said, to get back to how fast things are moving, those pilots that were on the furlough list a year ago today are now sitting in captain upgrade classes today. So things are moving really fast. The most junior captain on property was hired in December of 2018. To get to the pilots that we started hiring in September, that leaves about 1,200 pilots. By my math and historical looking back, that's about 3 vacancy bid iterations to get through those pilots, where we're starting to put upgrade pilots that were hired in September 2021. So our expectation and what we're putting out there is that the pilots that we're bringing in today will see the opportunities, if they choose it, to go to the left seat of our narrow-body fleet in less than 2 years. Just amazing opportunity. Makes us a little bit jealous working around it, but absolutely happy for them. And along those lines, we want to make sure that those pilots are pilots that are qualified and ready to be captains. They need to come with that experience and that knowledge and that logic process in their minds so that they're ready to jump in. And I tell this to the pilot, the professional leadership and mentorship course for the new captains, but my goal in hiring our pilots is to hire the best first officers I can for them. And the biggest lessons that I learned were probably, and I can isolate that down, of all the things I did, instructor pilot in the military, upgrading here, the most concentrated amount of learning that I did was my first 4 months as a regional captain before the 1,500-hour rule passed. And I'm flying with a 22-year-old Embry-Riddle graduate that's got 362 hours in my right seat in a regional jet. And I've just been a captain for 2 months. And just recognizing all of the guide rails that I have to put up for myself to not only protect me, but our crew, and not allow situations to take me out of my comfort zone and drag down the entire situational awareness of our crew. I learned a lot during that time frame, and there's a lot that happens in that capability in that first few months in your first time that you upgrade. Not to say that someone without that experience couldn't do well as a captain, but the other big lesson that I learned during that time frame is how to be a better first officer. I flew with first officers that, as good of a first officer as I thought I was, there are some things that were habits of mine that I thought were empowering and helping out my captain that in fact weren't actually helping. And when I saw other first officers do that for me, I'm like, okay, take that off the list. But I saw dozens and dozens of things that made life a lot easier for me that had never occurred to me. I never learned in the schoolhouse. And when I came here to American, that made me a much better first officer for the captains here. So that's what we look for in the pilots that we're hiring, is bringing that to the table and knowing that transformation is going to happen with our pilot group, and that we're going to have 50% in the next 7 years, and actually the next 12 years, 75% of the pilot seniority list is going to retire. That puts that 12 years out. Pilots getting hired now are probably looking at left seat opportunities to the 777 and the 787, which I think probably all of you would agree that that's not been ever like that around here before. So really fast movement. The other piece I'll touch on, and you met some of the American Airlines cadets that have the family roots here with American. We haven't told that story really well on the outside, but I think they will back me up in telling you that the noisy one out there, which I won't beat around the bush, is United Aviate. They're putting out a lot of flashy signs and stuff on social media and on the news, but in reality, when we started the American Airlines Cadet Academy back in 2018, and the partnerships and the investment we put in the mentorship program with our current existing pilots as mentors, and then just our team that's involved in helping develop that, and the flight schools we chose to partner with are producing fantastic pilots. And since 2018, we've got, next month, we will have our 100th cadet that is already flying at 121 carrier. So we're at 90 right now that are already flying at 121 carrier. Not to poke anybody's eye, but United hasn't even produced that many private pilot certificates yet. So we are really doing some good things. There's some great expansion that's happening there, and more things and more ways to care for those folks. The other piece that I'll touch on is that we've been working really hard on diversifying the flight deck. For a long time, our flight decks weren't representative of the passengers that we transport around and that the rest of the company looks like. And so we've been a lot more focused on that. And what I'll say about that is we do that the same way that you go, and there's probably one person that's a little off, because there always is, but probably the same way you go about buying a car. And that is, hey, I like this brand and this brand. I want it to have these features. I want this amount of performance. I want this kind of a warranty. And then I want that car to be red. You don't go and say, I'm going to buy any red car and then pick the first red car you see. And that's the same way that we go about picking our diverse candidates. We are intentional about hiring diverse candidates, whether it be women or people of color or diverse backgrounds of any type. But the way we do that is we still look for the same qualifications that we've always looked for in our pilots. And once we've met that, we go a step further and say, okay, we need to do a little bit better job of making more than women, making more than people of color. And to date, of that 1,700 pilots we've hired, 25% of them are people of color or women. So we've been doing a really good job in that category. And the proof is coming out in the schoolhouse. Out of all of that, all of the pilots that we've hired, we've only had one pilot so far that had struggled through training and actually made it to the line to IOE and just couldn't quite complete IOE. So historically, those numbers are around one pilot every 300 or so is about the normal washout rate. So 1 out of 1,700 pilots is doing really well. So I'll open up to questions for you guys. Yes, sir.
What are the minimum requirements being hired?
So yes, what the minimum qualifications are. What are the minimums to be hired? I am really dodgy about hours, and I will continue to be dodgy about hours because you don't want everyone to come here with the same amount of hours and the same experience and everything. That creates the same struggles that come with the complacency and levels of experience. So we hire across the spectrum. Our advertised minimums are ATP minimums, or 1,500 hours. But in reality, our competitive levels, when we look back, we still do put a lot of value in that term PIC time. That threshold is somewhere between 450 and 500 hours is what we look for those folks that have other of the things that we look for in components. The bigger piece that we look for, though, is the pilots that are looking for moving forward. So the ones that are taking the opportunities to upgrade as soon as they can. We hire pilots that have, we've got some pilots that have 1,600 or 1,700 hours, but that's in an F-18, they're mission commanders, they've been doing all kinds of flying, they've been also in leadership and doing a lot of other things. That 1,800 hours does not compare to someone who's been a flight instructor for 12 years and has 3,000 hours in a Cessna or an Archer. And it also doesn't compare to someone who's been flying C-17s around the world, and that doesn't compare to someone who's been spending time in regional jets flying the same checklist that we fly, the same routes that we fly to the same destination they go to. So based on their background, that varies, and we hire all across the spectrum. But by and large, if you were to look back on the average of the pilots we hire, they tend to have over 2,500 hours total time, closer to 3,500 hours, and they tend to have about 1,000 hours of turbine PIC time. Other questions? Russ.
This one blows my mind, Corey, but you said it was essentially around 2 to 3 years for narrow body captain?
Yeah, less than 2 years.
Okay,
Right.
so the wide body captain, what do we think?
Wide body captain, so for the ones in the first part of this wave, I'd say the first 700, it's going to be 10 years. For those that are getting hired today, now that we've already hired 1,800 pilots, it's still going to be 12 years or less.
Any comment on the age 65?
I think, it's easy for someone like Lindsey Graham who spent 30 years in a job that doesn't want to age out to say age isn't a factor, but by and large, I think from what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, that actually exasperates the problem. It doesn't help the problem by changing it, and ICAO rules still have the age 65. So wide body is where we're looking to have the nearest need, and the wide body pilots are still not going to be able to do their routes if they're over age 65. So it doesn't really help to satiate that need. So I think, from what I hear from the unions and from A4A, and just around the industry, it sounds like that is probably losing a little bit of steam and looking for other ways of just bolstering the influx of new people into the industry. Any other questions?
Is there still a shortage of check airmen?
Shortage of check airmen. That's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. It is always going to be. It's always going to be a strength. You can hire 3 times as many check airmen as we have, but you can only do so many sim sessions in a day and so many simulators, and there's no reason to ever make that higher than what you really need, because then the experience level of the collective goes down. So I think that's always going to be a strain point. But that being said, we're not having a problem with pilots dequalifying. We're not having a problem with pilots not getting qualified that are new hires. So in that regard, I think we're still staffed well enough to get our training that needs done at the current moment.
Follow up to that, is it, you heard a comment on the seat killer thing that's going on right now?
No, not at all. he just asked about the seat filler thing. You know, there's a big difference in culture, industry standards, and safety. Those are not all synonymous. I think, you know, from my personal perspective, I fly with seat fillers on every flight that I fly. Every person that's in that seat sitting next to me on a live flight, I would feel equally qualified to sit next to them in a simulator. That's me personally. And most times when that's happening and we're paired up properly, you are flying with actually an unqualified pilot because you're both going through the qualification at the same time. So that's my personal perspective, but you know, that's a much higher level to decide how that works and how that affects and changes with our culture.
Explain a little bit about the cadet program and what's involved in that.
Sure, yeah, the Cadet Academy, so I didn't really give you a full bookend, but I'll give you the highlights. So the Cadet Academy is an ab initio training program that gives you a very defined perspective of someone coming in with no experience whatsoever and seeing clearly defined paved path to becoming an American Airlines pilot. And it starts out with training. We partner with several flight schools around the country. Right now we have 4. We've gone through some different locations. There's some new ones that'll be probably coming online before the end of the year, but currently we have one here in Dallas. We have one down in San Marcos, Texas, one out in San Diego, and our partnership with that is Coast Flight Academy. And then we have one also in Phoenix, which our partnership is with CAE. Incidentally, we have a very good relationship with them on the simulator side, so there's some leverage on both sides on our partnership there. And what it does is it's kind of designed like the military flight training or UPT model in that they go through their flight ratings from no hours through CFII in approximately 12 months. That fluctuates by a couple months based off of flight availability, weather, examiners. You know, so there's some things that make that adjust a little bit, but the goal is by the time they've completed that year, they've got all of their ratings and they're qualified to go out and now make money as flight instructors. At that point, there's a partnership with our wholly owned regionals that have cadet programs that are more inclined to bridge the gap of what we call phase 2, which is the hour building phase. And it's designed again, just similar to the Air Force model, if you're familiar with the FAPE, the first assigned instructor pilot, where they go and now they're the instructors of the new coming in students. And they go flight instruct. Some of them stay at the school that they're at. Some go to other schools to flight instruct. And about 5 to 7% choose other means to hour build, whether that's towing banners or going to flight jumpers or doing some unique stuff in the 135 world. They go and build time to get to those that 1,500 hour ATP minimum. So they finish their ratings usually about 220 to 250 hours. Now they've got to get another 1,200 hours or so to get them to that ATP threshold. And they get a guaranteed interview with all 3 of our regional partners, Envoy, PSA, and Piedmont. Once they do that interview, that's a job, that's a CJO, it's a conditional job offer at that point, even though they have a few more years of flying to build that experience. But what comes with that is some benefits, some opportunities to pull some bonus money forward, and our mentors do a pretty good job of kind of helping along the way, and our mentors are pilots that are currently flying the line, of just saying, hey, don't go buy a motorcycle, maybe use that money and help pay down your loan a little bit. Here's what you look for in a job, here's how to work on your resume. You struggled on that right, it's okay, it happens to the best of us. Here's some ways to be successful. And for the most part, I think most of our cadets build a really good bond there and a relationship that lasts career-wise. And it's also good for our pilots because they feel tied into giving back to the industry. That takes about 2 to 2.5 years for that hour building. So in about 3.5 years, they're at that threshold to be able to go through and work as a regional pilot. And then of course all 3 regionals have a guaranteed flow. What I will tell you though is that we planted the seeds and we watered and we grew the orchard, and I kind of relate it more to an orchard than a farm because it takes a lot longer for a tree to produce fruit than a stalk to produce corn. So, but we've produced a tree now that's getting ready to bear the fruit. We're probably not going to wait to say you're going to stay there through the flow. We know their whole history all the way through. We keep a very close eye on what they're doing, whether they realize it or not. And we will probably give them the opportunity ahead of their peers to come over to American ahead of their flow, as long as they stay on that track through that process. So it's a guaranteed pathway. Obviously, you guys are probably aware currently, because of the strain on the pilot production, it's felt most at our regional level. So the regional airlines across the board have created a lot of bonus structures and a lot of additional money to throw at that allows them appropriately planned. If they take that loan product, they can pay it back. Incidentally, what makes the loan product more unique and different than any of the other flight programs out there is it's modeled much closer to like collegiate loan. So when they take the loan out, it's dispersed incrementally based on where they are in training. So it fully disperses probably about 2 or 3 months before they complete training, but it disperses on a timeline through that process as they meet certain gates. And then once it's fully dispersed, it's deferred for that 3.5 year time frame to allow them that time building. So they don't pay a single cent back if they don't want to on that loan until they're actually fully gainfully employed by one of the regional airlines making airline money at that point where they can afford it.
To be in the cadet program, do you have to have 0 hours, or can you go into the cadet program with 300 hours?
So the points of entry for the cadet program, it's designed for that person that has no experience. However, we accept cadets into the program up to the commercial. So they can have their private, they can even have their instrument rating. It's built to be a turnkey fixed cost product. So the further along you are, the more of the remedial training you have to get on board with the training program that you're joining. It's different than where you came from. And so you start losing a little bit of that value, and we determine that once you're at that commercial level, there's no real added value of joining that program because you have to go further backwards than there is distance to go forward.
I'm thinking about my son who has his commercial instrument, 300 hours. So because he's a family member or something like that, would that help if he decided he wanted to go forward with this?
If he's already got his commercial, he's out of the realm for the cadet program, or the cadet academy. However, the cadet programs that the wholly owns have they have all kinds of points of entry beyond that. So he's at a point, and off the top of my head, they've been changing those a lot, but the one that comes to mind is Piedmont will still allow him to affiliate and become a cadet, even though he doesn't have a CFI yet, and help him get through that CFI, give him a kind of a connection to the American family and a guaranteed path forward to getting that
But not on
Envoy, they do as well, but you have to be, that's changing as well, so I can't speak affirmatively, but the way it historically has been is you have to be at one of their partner schools. I think they're trying to change that so that you don't have to be a partner school, but I'm not sure where that exists right now.
Last question.
Last question.
No dumb questions.
All right. Well, thanks for having me here, and thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay, those were great speakers today. I thoroughly thank you very much for both of you coming, taking a long time out of your schedule. And we know how valuable your time is, so thank you very much. Thank you, Valentina, and all of the cadets who came today. We wish you the best. We're here for you. You have questions. How I kind of found out about this group, it's a Facebook group, and when I joined, there were about 600 flight attendants in this Facebook group, mostly American Airlines learning to fly or wanting to fly. And so there's encouragement right there online in social media. That group last week was nearly 1,000 flight attendants wanting to learn to fly. So it's somebody told me this, and I don't know who it was, but 52% of the people in medical school today are women. 52%. They are the majority in medical school. Now, we're a long way from that for the ladies in aviation, but we are up to around 14%, and that's huge from just 5 years ago. So it's a growing trend in America, and We thank you very much for coming. We hope you've enjoyed being our guest, and we are here for you going forward. I want to take another second to recognize Chris Torres for coming. I just can't tell you what the APA does for us and how important they are to the whole cog at American Airlines. I mean, the management team, the union, the pilots, it all has to work, and it's going to start working again sooner than later, really well for everybody. It's an awesome company. I can't even tell you how privileged I am to work here. Mike McGinnis gave me this. I was a former board of director for Snowball Express. Cheryl got this here, and several of us worked for years with Snowball Express. So I'm going to put this up here. It's extra large. It's a large, all right? So it's up here, and if anybody needs one, here it is. So we're dismissed. Thank you again for your support. It's a bar. Feel free to stick around and enjoy.